Have you ever noticed something strange? You ask a fluent English speaker a question, and before your brain even finishes processing the words, they already have an answer. Not a slow answer, not a carefully constructed answer, a fast answer, almost automatic. Meanwhile, many English learners experience something completely different. They hear the question, understand the question, know the answer, and then nothing comes out. Or maybe one word comes out, then silence, then panic, then the moment is gone. So what's the difference? Are fluent speakers secretly smarter? Do they have better memories? Do they know thousands more words than everyone else? The answer is surprising, and once you understand it, you may never look at speaking practice the same way again. Because fluent speakers are not doing what most learners think they're doing. In fact, they're doing far less. Let me show you. Imagine you're walking through a busy airport. People are moving in every direction. Announcements are playing overhead. Suitcases are rolling across the floor. And suddenly, someone asks you, "How was your weekend?" A fluent speaker answers instantly, "It was great. I went hiking with some friends." Simple, effortless, fast, but inside the mind of many learners, something completely different happens. The question arrives, then the brain starts searching. Weekend. Okay. Weekend means Saturday and Sunday. What did I do? How do I explain it? Which tense should I use? Past simple, present perfect. Should I say go or went? What if I make a mistake? What if they don't understand me? What if I sound stupid? And while all of this is happening, the conversation keeps moving. The opportunity disappears. The problem isn't intelligence. The problem is traffic. Too many cars trying to enter the same road at the same time. And this is where most people misunderstand fluency. They think fluent speakers speak quickly because they think quickly. Not exactly. Fluent speakers speak quickly because they don't have to think about most of the things you're thinking about. Think about driving. The first time someone learns to drive a car, every action requires attention. Hands on the wheel. Check the mirrors. Watch the road. Use the pedals. Signal before turning. Everything feels overwhelming. But years later, the same person can drive while holding a conversation. Not because driving became easier, because driving became automatic. Language works the same way. And here's the part nobody talks about. Fluent speakers are not building sentences from scratch every time they talk. They're pulling ready-made language from memory. This changes everything. Let's do a quick experiment. If I say, "Nice too," your brain probably already knows the next word. Meet. If I say, "How are," you probably know the next word. You. If I say, "See you later," notice what happened. You didn't create those phrases. You retrieved them instantly. No grammar calculation, no word search, no mental struggle, just retrieval. And that's exactly what fluent speakers do thousands of times every day. They don't invent language, they retrieve language. This is one of the biggest secrets behind fast speaking. But there's another secret hiding underneath it, and it explains why so many learners feel stuck, even after years of study. Imagine two students. Both know the same amount of vocabulary. Both understand grammar. Both can pass written tests. But one speaks much faster than the other. Why? Because vocabulary knowledge and vocabulary access are completely different things. Knowing a word is one thing. Finding it instantly is another. Think about a book in a giant library. You know the book exists, but if it takes 5 minutes to find it, the information isn't very useful during a conversation. Fluent speakers have organized mental libraries. Their words are connected, accessible, ready. Many learners have words stored in memory too, but they're scattered, hidden on distant shelves, hard to reach under pressure, and pressure changes everything. Have you ever noticed that you speak better when you're alone? Maybe you're practicing English in your room. Everything sounds great. Sentences flow. Ideas come easily. Then someone actually talks to you, and suddenly your English disappears. What happened? You didn't lose your knowledge. Pressure simply reduced access. Your brain switched from communication mode to survival mode. This happens to millions of learners. And the funny thing is that the harder they try, the worse it gets. Because now they're monitoring every word, every sentence, every mistake. Imagine trying to dance while constantly watching your own feet. You'd become stiff, awkward, slow. The same thing happens in speaking. The more attention you give to every tiny detail, the less natural you sound. This is why some learners who know less grammar often speak more confidently than learners who know more. Confidence isn't created by knowing everything. Confidence is created by trusting what you already know. And trust creates speed. But wait, there's something even more interesting happening. Something that fluent speakers do automatically without realizing it. When fluent speakers hear a question, they're often predicting the answer before the question even ends. Think about that for a second. They're not waiting. They're anticipating. Imagine someone starts asking, "What did you do after work?" Before the sentence finishes, the brain is already preparing possible answers. Went home, met friends, cooked dinner, watched a movie. Prediction shortens reaction time, and human brains love prediction. In fact, your brain is predicting constantly. Right now, as you listen, as you read, as you move through the world, fluent speakers simply become better at predicting conversations. And prediction feels like speed. But prediction isn't magic. It's built through exposure. The more conversations you experience, the more patterns you recognize. The more patterns you recognize, the more predictable conversations become. And then something amazing happens. You stop translating. This might be the biggest turning point in the entire journey, because translation creates delay. Let's say someone asks, "What do you usually eat for breakfast?" Many learners hear the English, convert it into their native language. Think of an answer. Convert the answer back into English. Then speak. That's 4 separate steps. Fluent speakers skip most of that process. The question enters. The answer leaves, almost directly, and every removed step creates speed. Now here's where things get really interesting. Most learners believe they need more vocabulary before they can speak faster. Sometimes that's true, but often it's not. Sometimes the real problem is choice overload. Imagine walking into a restaurant with 3 menu items. Easy decision. Now imagine a menu with 500 items. Suddenly choosing becomes difficult. Many learners experience this with language. Instead of choosing simple words they already know, they search for perfect words, more advanced words, more impressive words, better words, and that search creates hesitation. Fluent speakers often choose the first good option, not the perfect option. Good enough keeps conversations moving. Perfection stops them. This is why native speakers pause, restart sentences, and make mistakes all the time. Communication matters more than perfection. But there's one final piece of the puzzle, and once you understand it, you'll start noticing it everywhere. Listen carefully. When people speak fluently, they're not producing language one word at a time. They're producing chunks, small groups of words stored together, like building blocks. Instead of thinking, "I think that is a good idea," their brain retrieves, "I think that's a good idea," as one unit. Instead of building every sentence brick by brick, they're using larger pieces, which means less effort, less thinking, more speed. And this realization completely changed the way many successful learners approached speaking practice, because they stopped trying to memorize isolated words and started collecting useful chunks they could use again and again, chunks that appeared in real conversations, chunks that felt natural. The results were surprising, not because they suddenly became geniuses, but because they finally started practicing language the same way fluent speakers actually use it. And what happened next shocked them, because once those chunks started becoming automatic, conversations began to feel different. Not easier overnight, not perfect, but different. The pauses became shorter. The panic became quieter. The words arrived faster. And for the first time, speaking felt less like solving a puzzle and more like having a conversation. One learner described it in a fascinating way. He said learning English used to feel like carrying hundreds of loose bricks. Every sentence required picking up one brick at a time. heavy, slow, exhausting, but after focusing on common phrases and real conversations, it felt like carrying complete walls instead of individual bricks. Suddenly, he could build much faster. That's exactly what was happening. And here's the irony. Many learners spend years trying to sound advanced, but fluent speakers often sound simple. Listen carefully to everyday conversations. People repeat the same expressions constantly. To be honest, you know what? I think so. That makes sense. Not really. Sounds good. By the way, simple, predictable, repeated. These tiny chunks act like shortcuts through conversation, and shortcuts create speed. Yet many learners ignore them because they seem too basic. Instead, they chase rare vocabulary they'll use once a month. Meanwhile, the phrases used hundreds of times every week remain unpracticed. It's like training for a marathon by practicing backflips. Interesting, impressive, but not the skill you actually need. Now let me tell you something that surprises almost everyone. The fastest speakers are not always the people with the largest vocabularies. Sometimes they're simply the people who can access a smaller vocabulary more efficiently. Think about your phone. You may have 10,000 photos stored on it, but what matters isn't how many photos exist. What matters is how quickly you can find the one you need. Language works the same way. Retrieval beats storage. Access beats accumulation. And this leads to a question that changes everything. If fluency is largely about retrieval, then how do fluent speakers build such fast retrieval? The answer isn't studying more. It's recalling more. There's a huge difference. Imagine two people learning to play piano. One spends hours reading about music. The other spends hours touching the keys. Who improves faster? Usually the person using the skill. Language follows the same principle. Many learners spend most of their time receiving English, watching, reading, listening. These activities are valuable, very valuable, but fluent speakers develop speed through retrieval practice. They repeatedly force their brains to pull language out, and every successful retrieval strengthens the pathway. Like walking through a forest. The first time you walk a path, it's difficult. Branches block the way. Grass covers the ground. But walk the same path again and again, and eventually a clear trail appears. Your brain creates language trails exactly like this. The more often you retrieve a phrase, the easier retrieval becomes next time. This is why some learners suddenly experience what feels like a breakthrough. A phrase that once required effort suddenly appears automatically, not because they learned it that day, because the trail finally became strong enough. And here's something fascinating. Most breakthroughs are invisible while they're happening. Day after day, tiny improvements accumulate beneath the surface. Nothing feels different. Nothing feels dramatic. Then one day, a conversation happens and you answer instantly. For a moment, you don't even notice. But afterward, you think, wait, that was fast. Where did that come from? The answer is simple. It came from hundreds of previous moments, quietly building that pathway. Fluency often arrives gradually and reveals itself suddenly, which is why so many learners underestimate their own progress. They focus on mistakes. They remember awkward moments. They replay embarrassing conversations, but they rarely notice all the things becoming easier. And because they don't notice, they assume nothing is changing. Meanwhile, their brain is transforming in the background. Think about a child growing taller. If you see them every day, the change is invisible. But meet them a year later, and you're shocked. Language growth often works the same way. Now there's one final myth we need to destroy. The myth that fluent speakers never hesitate. Pay attention the next time you listen to native speakers. Really listen. You'll hear pauses, restarts, corrections, fillers, moments of uncertainty. You'll hear people say, let me think. What was I going to say? Actually, I mean, fluent speakers don't eliminate hesitation. They manage it. That's a massive difference. Many learners believe every pause means failure, so they panic during pauses. But pauses are normal, human, expected. The goal isn't speaking like a machine. The goal is staying comfortable, even when your brain needs a second. Because comfort creates flow, and flow creates the feeling of fluency. In fact, some of the most confident speakers in the world pause frequently. They simply don't fear the silence, and that confidence changes how listeners perceive them. When you're relaxed, people assume you're fluent. When you're panicking, even correct English can sound hesitant. Which brings us back to the original question. How do fluent speakers answer so quickly? Not because they're smarter, not because they know every word, not because they're secretly translating at superhuman speed. They answer quickly because thousands of language patterns have become automatic, because they retrieve instead of construct, because they use chunks instead of isolated words, because they predict conversations, because they trust simple language, because they've strengthened retrieval pathways through repeated use, and perhaps most importantly, because they've stopped demanding perfection from themselves every time they open their mouths. That's the hidden secret. Speed is often a side effect of trust. Trust in familiar phrases. Trust in imperfect communication. Trust that the conversation can continue even if every sentence isn't perfect. The moment many learners stop trying to create perfect English, their English starts moving faster. And the strange thing is that listeners usually understand them better too. So the next time you hear a fluent speaker answer instantly, remember this. You're not witnessing magic. You're witnessing automation. Thousands of tiny language habits working together behind the scenes. Habits that were built one conversation at a time, one phrase at a time, one imperfect attempt at a time. And the best part, those same habits are available to you. Every phrase you repeat, every conversation you have, every moment you choose communication over perfection. You're building them too, maybe much more than you realize. And one day, someone will ask you a question. You'll answer immediately. The words will appear before you have time to think. And for a brief moment, you'll remember a time when speaking felt impossible. Then you'll smile because you'll finally understand something fluent speakers discovered long ago. Fast speaking isn't about thinking faster. It's about needing to think less.